Good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar. Thank you for joining me, and today's topic is it's not about setting benchmarks, it's about setting the right benchmarks. And last week we discussed the book Good to Great by Jim Collins, and we talked about getting the right people on the bus, getting the wrong people off the bus, and then getting the right people in the right seats on the bus. So we're going to take that concept and continue along that line. We want to make sure that we're setting benchmarks, but we're just not setting any benchmark. We want to set the right benchmark. Now, before we get started, I just want to tell everyone a quick story of what I'm working on right now. I am working on social media and Facebook. I was given strict instructions by Danielle Weidman, my operations manager, to start working on my Facebook persona. So that's what I'm focusing on. So I've been sending out these invites to all my friends, trying to get them to like me, and I just got one back from Scott Mungie. I appreciated Scott, and I went onto your website and I said I like your website because you do have an excellent website. Scott Mungie's out of Atlanta, Georgia, and I've been close friends with him for a while. So looking forward to social mediaing with you on Facebook, Scott. Okay, so let's move it along. So it's not about setting benchmarks, it's about setting the right benchmark. So what does that mean? Well, if we take the next slide, and like we mentioned, Good to Great, each webinar we like to talk a little bit about some sort of quote from some sort of book. The 50th Law by 50 Cent, Robert Greene. When they were writing their book, they probably didn't think that a lawyer would be quoting one of their lines in one of his webinars several years later. But this line kind of stood out for me when I was reading the book. You know, let go of your perceptions and even your most cherished beliefs. Experiment. So how does that connect with setting benchmarks and setting the right benchmarks? Well, often when I'm doing consulting for companies, I'll talk to the business owner, and invariably they'll think that their staff is the best staff, working so hard and diligent, and they don't have anything new that they can advance their staff with or make their staff more productive. And I guess that's why they're calling me to review their productivity and their staffing and everything. But if we think about this quote, we think about, well, okay, let's, as business owners, look at something as if it's brand new, as if it could be wrong, it could be right, but let's experiment and understand what we're looking at. Let's not have any preconceptions. Let's assume that our procedures are the worst that we already have set up, even though they're most likely not, but let's let go of those preconceptions. And I think that this is a great quote for us to focus on for this particular webinar, because we're really talking about setting benchmarks and making sure that our staff is productive. And in order to make sure our staff is maximizing its productivity, we really have to look at each division, each position, and each task that each person does in their job. So questions to ask yourself. You know, is my company operating at the most optimal performance level? Is my entire staff on board with current expectations? And then have I put the right benchmarks in place, which is going to maintain a maximum productivity at all times? So, you know, you have to be honest with yourself too. You know, these are important questions, because if we're not, if all those questions are no, then there's a good chance that we could be inefficient by at least 10, 20, 30, even 50%. I've gone into companies and been able to reduce their staff by 50% on some occasions. And that's a tremendous decrease in expense. And as we spoke about in one of the previous webinars, you know, it's not about just increasing your revenue. It's also about decreasing your costs, and decreasing your costs. Because either way, whether we increase our revenue or decrease our costs, it affects the bottom line the same way. Okay? So now, what are benchmarks? I'm sure everyone in this call, you know, sets some sort of benchmark. And everyone probably has some sort of different idea of what a benchmark is and how a benchmark should work. But benchmarks are performance indicators that allow you to track the performance of your company. And without the right benchmarks, it's hard to operate efficiently. So what does that mean? Benchmarks are performance indicators. Well, performance indicators, we could look at the company overall and say, look, we need to hit $1 million in revenue a month or $200,000 in revenue a month. Those are performance indicators. We could also look at our staff members and say, okay, well, that person needs to file 10 applications in one day. If they don't hit their 10 applications in one day, then maybe they're not the right person for this particular job. Or is 10 applications completed in one day the right number? And how do we figure out if it is the right number? So benchmarks are pretty critical with any business. So how do we create some sort of benchmark? I think benchmarking falls into a few different categories with our business, and there are different ways to analyze each different benchmark. But regardless of whatever you're doing and whatever you're analyzing, whoever you select to analyze it, if it's you, if it's one of your managers, or if it's a staff member who's really great at processes, the bottom line is they have to be able to take a step back, look at that project analytically, and see, do we have any extra steps in the process that we can remove from that particular process? Can we take out things that are making us inefficient and not lose any effect in the whole process whatsoever? And then we do that in one slice. Once we do that in one small area, then we can roll it out to the entire process. We could look at a case that lasts for 2 years. And we look at all the different touches in that file, all the different communications with the client, and we figure out, well, are there different ways that we can shorten the amount of work hours in the same amount of time that it takes to process that case, so we become more efficient? And if we can shave off 2 hours or 10 hours or 20 hours per file, well, then we can have a major impact on our business. And that's how you would first analyze your different processes that you have in place. Once we analyze the processes, we would have to complete the process. We would have to go step by step by step to make sure that we can do what we just analyzed or what we said we think we can do. And then we would have to, as the person who's running that project, as the person who's figuring it out, needs to actually do the project. It's not enough to analyze the project and say, okay, go team, go ahead, you can do it. Because it's not the same. You're going to have a disconnect between the people that are doing it and the person that's figuring out what to do. Through the whole process, you have to have buy-in and involvement from both parties, the analytical manager as well as the staff that has to do the project. So once you do your analysis and then you complete the project, or whoever's analyzing it would complete the project, then you have the person or the manager work with the staff and also complete the project. Once we put those pieces together, then we can establish our real benchmark, a real time frame that we can complete a certain project. But until we do those two steps, there's no way to establish a benchmark. It's like just picking some number out of the sky and saying, okay, well, I think an application should be done in 30 minutes. That might be extremely aggressive, or it might be extremely conservative. But if we don't complete the analysis and we don't complete the project, then how do we know if 30 minutes is the right number? So in order to pick the right number, we have to establish, we have to complete the project. And then we have to make sure that the right person is actually completing the project and doing the analysis. Or else we're going to have someone we're going to put that benchmark in place that may be unachievable, which would be extremely discouraging for the staff. Or it just could be too long to complete that project, so the staff is just slowing down and not completing as much as they should be able to. But in either case, we need to set the right benchmark. And then once we do this and we establish the benchmark, it's always good to make sure that you redo it so that you double check to make sure that that benchmark is correct and accurate. And then you do this over and over and over. So takeaway number one, you have to evaluate your benchmarks. You have to rationalize, you have to evaluate them, and you have to be honest with yourself. You know, whether they're too short or too long, you have to be honest. Setting benchmarks. You know, identify what your company's goals are. You know, it's obvious, right? Set clear short-term and long-term goals. Another obvious one. Now the third one, create benchmarks that are unachievable. Unachievable benchmarks. Why would I ever set an unachievable benchmark? What's that going to do for me? If I set an unachievable benchmark, no one's ever going to hit it. And now people are completely discouraged. And now I'm tracking numbers that are never going to get hit. Well, that's one way of looking at it. The other way of looking at it, and usually I'll set unachievable benchmarks. And when I say unachievable, I don't mean they're really not achievable. I'm talking about the appearance of unachievability. And there's a big difference. You know, if someone's normally used to completing an application in an hour, you know, I'm going to give them 40 minutes to complete the application. Or 45 minutes. I'm going to shave off somewhere between 20 and 30% of what I really think, or of what they really think they can accomplish. Because invariably, if someone who does a project sets a benchmark, they're going to give themselves a lot of extra time. So I'm going to account for that. You know, if I'm doing the test and I'm doing the workup to evaluate how long a project takes, I'm still going to shave off 20% of the time. Because I think there's going to be someone who can do that process faster than me. You know, I'm not great at manual processes, like repeatedly, you know, taking staples out of things, putting them, you know, on a flatbed scanner, scanning them in, importing the documentation. That is not my best skill. But I can evaluate to determine the shortest, you know, the shortest targets to hit in that process. That I can do. But when it comes to doing it, I'm not going to be as fast or as accurate as someone else who's really great at that. So when I do it, I'm going to shave points off. I'm going to shave time off. When someone else does it and sets their own benchmark, I'm going to shave time off of it. And what's going to happen is they're going to come close to hitting my benchmark. They may not hit it exactly, but they're going to come within a few percentage points of hitting that benchmark. And then I've just gotten 15% extra productivity, 18% extra productivity across the board, all the people doing that task. So that's what I mean by unachievable benchmarks. Now, if we take a step back and look at company goals, you know, we have to look at, you know, how much productivity each position's going to generate. We have to think about, you know, are these positions valuable or not valuable? Can we eliminate positions and still get the same amount of work done? And short and long-term goals. You know, what is short? How short should a short-term goal be? Sometimes with the goals that I set are, you know, are 1 hour. We might monitor staff members that are, you know, staff members and track their time hour by hour by hour while we're setting benchmarks. And then we may become a little bit more lenient and track their time by half a day or hour. We may track their time by half a day or full day. So over time, we change the way we evaluate, you know, our goals. And then hopefully we don't have to monitor that staff member every day or every hour. But what it'll do is it'll set up a series of targets that we look at over a period of time, and we can see at the end of the week, okay, did that person hit that week's goal? Did they hit their month goal? Did they hit their quarterly goal, their semi-annual goal, and their year goal? But everything has to start off really small in time increments. Because if we start measuring on a week or a month, or even a day at the beginning, well, it's really hard to set benchmarks. It's really hard to identify how much time that one task takes when we isolate that one task. Now, when you string tasks together, well, that's different. You know, then we have a longer, you know, process, a compilation of processes. So that's a little bit different. Okay, a blank screen. What is a blank screen? A blank screen. Takeaway 2, implement. So we evaluate and we implement. But this implementation has to be its own webinar. To do implementation in this particular, you know, basic benchmarking process, I think it's a lot of additional information, and I don't think that we can talk about implementation during this one. Now, implementation is critical, because if you don't roll out a project and you can't implement the tracking of a benchmark the right way, it's going to fail from the beginning. If our employees aren't being detailed and forthright when they're documenting something, or the system isn't tracking something the right way, then our implementation fails as well, because we're just not getting, and we don't have accurate data. So implementation is pretty important, and I think we need to do a whole webinar on implementing benchmarks. So the 3 P's to benchmarking your employees: productivity, professionalism, progression. So, what does that mean? Why are we looking at productivity, professionalism, and progression? So productivity, employee A versus employee B. Productivity. I manage my deadlines well, I'm always 95 to 100% productive, and I'm detail-oriented. Sounds like a great employee. Employee B, I have a relaxed demeanor. I want to hang out. I don't work at a real fast pace. I reach my goals 80 to 90%, but I'm very casual. I'm easy to get along with. For me, in my office environment, I pick employee A. We require, a strong diligence and work product. That's what we really want. We don't want people taking breaks all the time throughout the day. No cigarette breaks. We don't want cell phone breaks unless something's an emergency. We're not operating that way. We want people that are focused and able to self-motivate and complete projects fast and on time and accurately. Whereas some of the office environments that I go to, there are several employees where it's a very relaxed and it's a different environment, and that's fine. Work-life balance for some employers is very important in the workplace. If you're working on smaller margins, doing Social Security, VA, and some other practice areas, well, a relaxed demeanor is very hard to manage and keep your staff productive and turning a profit. Professionalism. I have great communication skills. I'm always compliant with company policies. Company policy is very underrated among professionals and attorneys as far as business owners. In at 8:05, most employers don't mind if an hourly staff member is in at 8:05 or 8:10 if you're supposed to start at 8. A lot of the companies that I do consulting for, they start at 9, and they don't mind if the employee gets in at 9:15 or 9:05, and then they give an hour paid lunch, and then they leave at 5 p.m. It's very common. I don't communicate well. Well, everyone doesn't communicate well. In some positions, it's not required to communicate well. But following company policy, if the workday starts at 8 o'clock, I'm expecting that people are in their chair a few minutes before 8, they've gotten their coffee, used the restroom, done whatever they need to do, and then they sit down, they're ready to roll at 8 o'clock, and they clock in at 8 a.m. sharp. I want them clocking in at 8 a.m. sharp if they're hourly. I want them clocking in at 5 p.m. sharp. I want them taking their hour lunch, and I don't want to have any overtime. HR, I think, is a very underrated area. I think it costs a lot of people, a lot of companies, a lot of money when HR rules are not followed. Because if you're lax on your HR rules and you have 20 employees, you're easily losing 20 hours of productivity, maybe 40 hours of productivity every single day. And that's a tremendous amount of time. 10 hours a day is a whole person, a little more than a person. So, HR is critical, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit. Progression. So some employees, I do want to progress. I want to progress self-motivated people that progress the required skills that the company needs and move them forward. Some employees, if I have someone in the mailroom that doesn't really speak very well or doesn't speak English, that's fine, because they could work in the mailroom and do a great job and be very diligent, and I don't have to pay them as much money. But I also cannot continue to progress them up either in the company or pay-wise. because I can't turn a 10-hour position into a 15-hour position because I've progressed someone up over 5 years. So you have to be careful of increasing people's pay when the position remains the same. It's very important. You know, someone who's fine with it where they are at the company, winging it 50% of the time, you know, not getting the proper training, and it really doesn't matter to the person. You know, those are all, you know, flags. You know, all of these areas on this right side, they're all flags. And I don't like, you know, I try not to have any employees with really any of those qualities, because it's just not going to benefit the company. It's not going to benefit the morale. It's not going to benefit the type of culture that I'm promoting within my company. Now, everyone who's on this call, if you're a business owner or you manage people, you have to figure out what type of culture you want to maintain within your company, and then you run with that culture. Okay, so employees. As I mentioned, I think employee productivity and employee monitoring, use of employee manuals, mission statements, I think they're extremely undervalued within the legal field. And a lot of companies lose a lot of money not taking advantage of setting strict policies with employees. I think onboarding is a challenge for a lot of companies. Exiting employees that aren't productivity is a problem for a lot of companies. So we put together this check sheet for you to score yourself or score some of your employees. You could do it for one of them or all of them, but you know, you get to rank them and score them and put your comments next to them. You know, feel free to bring them to the HR blueprint that we're doing, the A to Z HR blueprint. We're doing that with Pillman and Ken Hardison in March 6th in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. We're very excited about that. This is one of the first seminars that we're doing, and I think it's going to be great. You know, we're going to hand out a lot of materials. We're going to do you know, very interactive sessions, town hall meetings style, panel discussions. So I think that the HR blueprint's going to be great. Okay, so reassess your benchmarks. You know, whether it's quarterly, semi-annually, monthly, annually, you know, you always have to reassess your important benchmarks. And the important benchmarks are obviously the ones that are more used throughout the company. So if you're filing a ton of applications or you're doing something that you're doing all the time and there are a lot of people doing that, it's very important to reassess the benchmarks. If it's not done very often, or if it's, you know, a small group of employees, it's less important to benchmark it, and it's less important to reevaluate it. Industry changes. Industry changes are very important. You have to recognize industry changes. You have to be able to adapt to changes, and you know, it's very hard. You know, it's very hard to run your business. So make sure you're aware of industry changes. Adjust your benchmarks as needed. You know, whether it's because processes change, employees change, whether you're just trying to become more efficient. So takeaway number 3 is reassess your benchmarks. So the 3 takeaways: evaluate, implement, and reassess. Implementation, we're going to do our own webinar on, but you know, I recommend, you know, setting and establishing benchmarks as much as you can without going crazy. And then when you're setting your benchmarks, make sure that the data that you're receiving from your employees and from the tracking that you're receiving matches up with your benchmark. Because you know, frequently I'll hear someone say, you know, my retainer team is the best. You know, we get back 90% of the files that we mail out to our clients. And I say to them, wow, you know, that's really great. You're gonna have to show me how you do that, because you know, we don't get 95% of our mailouts back that we send to our clients. We might get, you know, 75 or 80% back that we mail to our clients. You know, what are you doing? So then what we'll do is we kind of go through an analysis, and by the end of the analysis, we understand that, you know, when you take away folders, you know, that are getting returned to sender because the address isn't right, and you're taking away cases where the client calls and says, I'm no longer interested, and you're taking away a majority of the folders that don't come back in the door, well, of course, yes, your retainer percentage, if you send out 100 but you only really count 80 that sent out, and you get 77 back. Well, yeah, of course you're hitting 95% because you just took away 20% of the folders that you're tracking. So if you're not, tracking the benchmarks the right way, this process doesn't work. So, always be honest with yourself. If the numbers don't sound right, make sure you double check them. So, any questions, you can always email them to questions@caseghost.com. We always look forward to answering questions. If you have any for the next webinar, feel free to start emailing us questions ahead of time. We'll gladly answer them during the presentation. And Happy New Year to everyone, and I hope everyone has a great day.